the incumbent, Boston's current mayor, Kim Janey. She's the first woman and first black mayor in the city's history. But before taking office, she served as city council president. She's both a mom and a grandmother. Our next candidate, Michelle Wu, currently serves as city councilor at large. She's held that position for 8 years. Wu was the first woman of color to serve as Boston City Council president.
And good evening. I am live right now watching the Boston Mayoral Forum. So the format is going to be this. I am going to watch the Boston Mayoral Forum, maybe give some comments during it, and then afterwards I will give you my analysis of what happened and also my predictions. And I will timestamp in the description if you just want to skip ahead to all that. And with that, here we go.
Committee. He served on the Walsh administration for 7 years and is a dad of 4. All right, so there you go. Let's go over the rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will start off answering one question on the same topic with 1 minute to respond. Rebuttals will be at my discretion. They give me that kind of power tonight. The candidates will then get 45 seconds for individual questions with a 30-second rebuttal, again, at my discretion. Plus, then there'll be a rapid fire round at the end of the evening. And finally, each candidate will have a 30-second closing statement. All right, and we would like to hear from you at home as well all night long. To get in on the action, you can message us, tweet us, tag us, but be sure to use the hashtag BossMayorDebate, BOSMayorDebate, to follow along online. So before tonight's debate, names were drawn to decide the order of the questions so that we could be fair about this. So Councilor Wu, you're up first. How would you grade the city of Boston and its handling of the pandemic? I'm looking for a letter grade A through F, and why?
So first, thank you, Shannon, and I'm so excited to be here on this historic stage alongside leaders and colleagues in this field. I want to wish my husband, Connor, a happy wedding anniversary. Love you. And to center in this moment that this election is about the future of our city. What we have gone through with the pandemic has highlighted, deepened, exacerbated every inequity. I would give our city of Boston a C+ for how we've handled the pandemic. We have gotten to the point where we are now seeing businesses beginning to wonder about what the next steps are as the Delta variant ramps up. We are sitting on the verge of schools reopening and a lot of uncertainty as well. We need to do better about closing the gaps and addressing the issues that this pandemic has exacerbated, but were already present in our communities for a long time before. I'm running for mayor of Boston to take on the big challenges, to take on the issues that will drive the future of this city. I have a track record in City Hall of knowing just what's possible when we build coalitions and center communities in that work.
Councilor Wu, thank you for that response. Councilor Campbell,
hey, they let you on Barrows.
F and why?
Poor guy.
I would probably first of all, thank you for having me. I would probably give a D. I filed a hearing order back on this issue in December of last year, particularly looking at vaccinations and how we would need, of course, to go into communities of color, immigrant communities, especially those that are hardest to reach, to ensure that they were getting vaccinated. It's simple. We need masks, we need vaccination. Right now in the city of Boston, we have a mask mandate, of course, for city employees, as well as a vaccination mandate or regular testing. We have mask mandates for those who are external to the city, but we do not have vaccination requirements. I've
already
been on
hitting
the
with the
record
vaccine
leading
mandate.
the way, pushing the city of Boston, pushing the acting mayor, of course, and the administration to implement what New York City's doing, what San Francisco's doing. All of these best practices we know are saving lives. Right now, I live in Mattapan. We have the lowest vaccination rate in the city of Boston. We can change that by adopting some of these best practices. My leadership is decisive, especially when it comes to a public health crisis like COVID-19. And it's also essential for reopening our economy.
Councilor Campbell, thank you very much for that response. Let's go to Councilor George now. Grade and why?
First, thank you very much for having us tonight. It's Councilor Asaibi George, and I hope to be Mayor Asaibi George soon.
Already messed
and as
up
the only teacher on this
last
stage,
name,
someone
not
who spent
good.
13 years in the classroom grading students, I think, overall, I'd give our response as a city a C, but it certainly has to be over the response of 18 months. We've been in the thick of COVID. We've been in the thick of this pandemic for too long. And from the beginning, when we had difficulty getting testing into the hands of our city's residents, to then a vaccine rollout that had some starts and stops, and now we're in a great spot with high rates of vaccination. Certainly we have to do more across our city. We've lost the mark a little bit on testing, and I'd like to see us, especially with the breakthrough cases, get back into gear with that testing. And then I think about our small businesses, the impact that this pandemic and some of the uncertainty that we've seen over this last year and a half has had on our small businesses. We have to do more for them.
Okay, Councilor Asabi George, apologies.
Thank you.
Thank you. Noted moving forward. Mr. Barros, a grade and why?
Thank you very much. First, it's great to be here. Thank you. The grade would be a B. I was there in government as Chief of Economic Development when the pandemic first hit, and we mobilized. We got together and we were having meetings every day at 8 a.m. to make sure that Boston was safe, had the information it needed. The mayor put together a COVID relief fund and raised more than $34 million to make sure that we were providing PPE or personal protective equipment, to make sure we were providing testing in our neighborhood. Then he announced me, and along with Chief Martinez, as the two co-chairs for the Health Inequities Task Force, knowing that our most vulnerable communities would be hit the hardest. We mobilized then 6 different funds and moved more than $26 million to help save our small businesses.
Ooh, fun follow-up. If you were head of equity, why was the response in Boston so unequitable?
Small businesses coming on, telling us what they needed, telling us what they were hearing and what we should be doing more of. Government was swift, we were nimble, and we were trying to be as creative as possible, and I think we did a good job.
All right, Mr. Barros, thank you very much. Mayor Janey, you're asked to grade yourself here in some respect, although obviously the pandemic started before you took over. A to F, and why?
I would give an A-. And first, I want to start by thanking all of the sponsors of this important discussion. I give it an A- because as someone who has experienced many of the challenges in our city, I bring that life experience to the job as mayor. Decades-long advocacy for children and families. And when I took over in March, we were in the midst of the pandemic. I acted quickly to get vaccines into arms. I invested a total of $3 million in a vaccine equity grant so that we could focus on the hardest hit communities. And now in the city of Boston, more than 70% of every resident has at least one shot. That is the work that we've done. We were first in the Commonwealth to implement a mask mandate in our schools. We have a vaccine mandate for city employees, and now we have a mask mandate for indoor spaces that are open to the public. We need to continue to do more to get the vaccine into arms to make sure that we are doing everything to slow the spread, and that is what I have done as mayor of Boston.
All right, Mayor Janey, thank you very much. And you brought me very perfectly to our next question here. And this is going to be a question for Mr. Barros. I'll direct this at you first. If the FDA grants full approval on a vaccine for children under the age of 12 years old, would you still require masks in schools for all students and staff? Let's begin.
Yes. First, I would require that all students who
This is such an
could
easy question.
be vaccinated. And then we know that there are breakthrough cases. We know the more time you spend with someone in a room, then the higher the chance is that you would be susceptible to an infection. We need to protect our students. We need to protect our staff and teachers to make sure that everyone is feeling safe going back to school. It is incredibly important that we have in-school classes. And as mayor, I would want to keep everyone safe. Mandating vaccines and masks will do that.
All right, Councilor Rue.
We've been counting down the days to the election in my household, but there's one more important date that we've been counting down, which is the first day of school tomorrow. Both my boys are in the Boston Public Schools, and we've had lots of conversations about what this school year will look like. It's been a tremendous stress for our families, for educators, for school staff, over 2 school years now of uncertainty. I do support ensuring that we continue to mask up and that we are using every bit of our public infrastructure to continue closing vaccination gaps. When that approval
response,
comes for
personalizes
children
it.
under 12, we should use our schools as a platform to be able to vaccinate so that we can meet families right where they're at. And it goes beyond just our school buildings, just our vaccination efforts today as well. Our school buildings need to be revitalized so that they're healthy. With such an old footprint in Boston, only 30-some of our 125 school buildings have modern HVAC systems. It's been a tremendous stress in the pandemic, and we need facilities that are healthy, inspiring, and support learning across all.
Really good answer.
Masks then, even after kids could be vaccinated under the age of
Yes,
12?
absolutely.
So then,
And then she
this is to
then she
all of you,
repeats
at what point do you take
the
masks
dumb
off? If
layup
kids can be
question.
vaccinated, adults can be vaccinated. Where's the threshold then? Where you know a lot of people sort of push back on this.
As a
George?
classroom teacher, former
I
classroom
thought she was
teacher, and a
challenging
parent
Michelle
of
on that. That
four
was
Boston
strange.
Public Schools students and a graduate of BPS myself, it is so important that
Anissa
we are
will mention she's a
following the
teacher
science
in
through
just
this
about every
work.
single answer.
And I don't expect
should.
that masks will come off at any point in time during this year. Although we've been aggressive and we've worked really hard to educate and inform our city's residents on the importance of being vaccinated, we'll need to do a lot more educating around our young people. These are our children, these are our babies. It's important work to make sure the information is present, the information is there, and the work is before us. But we've got to exist in reality. The masks aren't coming off this school year, and I think it's important when we make decisions that we're basing it on the science.
Council, we brought us to our next topic.
To
of
respond to
course. You're
someone's
right, school
comment,
begins
I'll read
tomorrow.
it.
A lot of parents
Andrea
thrilled
Campbell
about
said
that,
she'd
but
give the
also
city a
there's
D
lot
for
of,
pandemic handling. She's
uncertainty
ridiculous.
out
That
there
data
right now
doesn't
about
support
this, the
that.
bus
Laugh my
driver
ass off.
shortage, the lack of information
I mean,
in
right
general.
now
There's a
she's
lot of
trying to
Boston
differentiate
parents
herself
concerned
from
and
Kim Janey and take down any support that she has. So, I mean, politically, she's supposed to say F, but I mean, D is also a good response by her.
This issue starting
Let me start on the last question. So yes to the answer on masks. This is the third school year that our children are being impacted by COVID-19, and it has been incredibly difficult. So we need to continue to mask up, and I am proud that we were the first in the Commonwealth to require masks. And when it comes to the bus drivers, I'm really encouraged that our bus drivers and TransDev and the school department have reached an agreement. We are expecting and welcoming all of our bus drivers back to welcome our children.
Tomorrow.
Yes, tomorrow. So I am very encouraged by that. And I'm excited for a new school year, even though it will be difficult. We will get through it. We'll get through it together, supporting our young people.
You guys are mothers and fathers.
And also, there was a recent article that we don't have enough bus drivers, so tomorrow is going to be rough.
A lot of parents that have called me, and they're not so confident. So the acting mayor is pretty confident. I just remember talking to 2 bus drivers before getting here, and they're not so confident. They've called this the worst of any school year that they've been a part of in terms of the chaos and information.
Sean
that's been
Barrow's going out
sent
taking
and what
punches.
they've been given in terms of
Throwing
rights.
punches for Kim
They don't know
Janey.
what's going on.
At Kim
and
Janey.
so I, in fact, am hopeful to hear from the acting mayor that it'll be fine tomorrow. But people aren't so confident out there.
Well, I remain encouraged. We have been working closely with the bus drivers. We reached an agreement. We know that this is a difficult issue. As a parent of a BPS graduate myself, I know that there's a lot of anxiety around the first day of school.
Yes.
And we all know that COVID has made things worse. Every single
Oh,
issue
God,
in
she's
our
gonna
city.
get
Our bus
bashed
drivers care about our
if
kids. Our
there's
teachers
one
care about our
student
kids,
who
and
do- who
everyone
waits
has
on
been
a
working
curb
hard
and
to
the
make
bus
sure
doesn't
that
show
the
up.
first day of school goes off smoothly for our children.
Councilor Campbell, I know you wanted to say something.
Absolutely. So my oldest son, Alexander, who's 4 years old, will be starting at Boston Public Schools in next week. And I was one of those parents that actually got a recorded voicemail leaving me a message saying there was going to be a shortage of bus drivers, with little information as to who to call, where to get information, how to figure out if your family would be affected. That's just absolutely unacceptable when you think about this system and the erosion of trust that's actually been taking place over the years because of the lack of transparency from Boston Public Schools and the district. We did know there's been a bus shortage. There's a national bus shortage right now. We should have been proactive in planning for this, of course, making sure our bus drivers had everything they need and families as well. And so continuing to push for that transparency and proactive planning, because that's what our families deserve. And in the middle of a pandemic, the last thing we want to do is add any additional stress or burden to our families.
So, yes, Councilor Boone.
I just want to emphasize that, as parents, we know every single little logistical detail has a huge impact on the day-to-day stress levels and experience and feeling of connection and trust for our families with the school district. But we need to center that the issues we're talking about now are very much because we have been missing a long-term vision and a plan for a long time in BPS. I am now in my second round of being a BPS mom, having raised my sisters while my mom was living with mental illness. And I know that if you go and visit every single Boston public school,
every time Michelle
you can see
personalizes
the
the
scale of
answer?
disparities between the facilities
Very
that our
good.
students
That's
are
what you
in,
wanted, though.
between the programming and the resources. We need a vision that comes from our school communities, and I'm proud to have put forward a very comprehensive plan so that we will not just be talking about immediate Band-Aids that are needed as we're in the midst of crisis, but the long-term investments,
for whatever
supports,
that was.
and healing and reconnection that our communities deserve.
If I'm a mother or a father tomorrow morning and I'm crossing my fingers that the bus is coming, but I have to go to work, what am I supposed to do? What's the plan then?
Kim Janey's got to get
moving forward
hammered.
to make sure that kids get where they need to go so I can feel comfortable going to my job.
This is why she skipped
and
so many
knowing they're
debates.
getting where they're going.
So immediately after, I will just say, immediately after this happened, because not only did I get the voicemail, as you can imagine, I'm sure all of us, our phones were inundated with calls, with text messages from families. And immediately said to the district, the acting mayor, and the administration, it is essential that there be individual outreach to every single family that wants, of course, transportation from Boston Public Schools, that there be actual information on whether or not their bus will be available, where and when, and if there is a shortage for that particular family, that there be an immediate alternative made available. And while we think about longer plans and visions to improve our Boston Public Schools, which is essential, of course, right now parents need immediate action. They need decisions made, because at the end of the day, everyone wants their children to go back to school in person. I know I do, I know you do, I know we all do. But it's really essential that we get this right immediately.
I'm going to move on to the next question because it relates to this. We're going to take a question now brought to us from our media partner, the Dorchester Reporter. Have a listen.
My wife and I are raising our 2 small children here in Dorchester, and we'd really like to have them enrolled in Boston Public Schools. But we're also concerned about having access to the best quality for our kids close to home. What will you do differently as mayor of Boston to make our public schools the most viable option?
All right, great question. Councilor Wu, you touched on this. Do you want to expound upon that?
Yeah, for me, this has been a decade being part of BPS as a legal guardian and now a mom of my 2 boys.
Fourth
We
time
are in a
personalizing it.
system
I'll stop
that
calling
is
it
in the
out, but
midst
it
of
is
a
what you're supposed to
mecca
do.
Of education. Boston is the city that invented the idea that education should be free, high quality, and available to all. We need to continue to connect those resources with our communities. My plan has 4 main parts to it. First is to close the gap on early education and childcare. We have to start early, and that has such an impact on our economy as well. Second is whole child supports. I'll put in place a children's cabinet so that we provide all the services our families need. We also need to rehab our facilities with the inspiring academic and supportive environments that our children deserve. And last but not least, we need to connect vocational education to every single student and job pathway in the city.
Councilor Sabi George, you have a take on this?
I have lots of takes
I
on
liked
this
the
as
first
well.
one, and then I
As a former
forgot
classroom
the
teacher
second and third point
someone
Michelle
who,
made.
discovered a love for Boston politics and municipal government as a high school student in Boston myself. You know, our schools need a great deal of work, and certainly future
So far,
planning is
Wu
important,
and
but there
Anissa are doing
things
the
that
best.
we need to do today. It's certainly related to our bus budget. This school year, we are committed to $137 million transporting kids to and from school. And unfortunately, the majority of those kids that will find themselves on a school bus will be moving from a community that doesn't have a high quality school to another community that does not have a high quality school. I am committed that every seat, every classroom, every school community has a high quality experience for that child. That's around grade reconfigurations, high school redesign, investment in special education, and early
grade
literacy, as well as
reconfiguration
so much
is
more. We
normally
wanna fix the
code for
schools.
closing
We wanna
schools.
improve education in this city. I suggest the people of Boston consider hiring a teacher for that job.
Mr. Barrows.
One politically fantastic
Sure.
answer from
I see,
Anissa.
Mrs. Sabi George has read my plan on the website.
Ooh, calling her out.
Busing has failed us.
Yeah, John Barrows.
In fact,
No one
busing
has
has
called.
failed
No one
the
has read
very
your plan.
black and brown children that it was meant to help.
No one has been to your
It has
website.
not given us quality schools. It has not given equal distribution to resources. We need to now make sure that every neighborhood has a quality school with quality seats. In fact, that's why I've said, as mayor, I will invest $4 billion to make sure that every neighborhood has a quality school, and that we have labs, we have libraries, that we have theaters, that we have the appropriate HVAC system so that when our
like
students and
3.5
teachers are
times
in our
the current
classrooms at
budget
90
of
degree weather,
BPS.
that they can actually be there, that we bridge the digital divide that we still have in our schools. It is ridiculous that Boston, with all the wealth that we have, don't have the kinds of schools that represent what we should be giving our children. And then we're talking about buses, we shouldn't be. We should be all walking to our neighborhood schools.
Mayor Janey, where
Yes.
are we right now
Let
with
me
this?
I mean,
just jump
John
in,
did
please,
address
because I come
the
at
lack
this,
of funding
certainly
that
as
is
someone who
needed.
went to
So
BPS
I'll
schools,
take
I
it.
saw the worst of our schools in the 1970s when I was bused. I'm the parent of a BPS graduate. I was born into a family of educators, and I spent my career fighting for quality schools at a nonprofit, Massachusetts Advocates for Children. And so I understand that there are several challenges with our schools, very systemic challenges, and we need to make sure that we are investing in early childhood education. I've invested, as mayor of Boston, $30 million in our HVAC system so we can improve the quality of our schools in terms of heating, cooling.
I don't
and
remember
we also
that.
need to make sure that we are doing
Where's that
the
30 coming
investments
from?
around STEM, around arts, early childhood education. We need to do so much more to ensure that there is a quality school in every single neighborhood in the city of Boston. We can't just focus on 3 schools. We have to focus on all of our
Ooh,
schools.
pivot to the exam schools. Ask a question about exam schools.
Absolutely. I'm the only candidate who went to 5 Boston public schools, including Boston Latin School. And I care deeply about education because Boston Public Schools took a poor girl out of Roxbury and sent me to Princeton University. And by all metrics, I've been successful in my life. But it's the same system that failed my twin brother, Andre. He attended Madison Park, Burke High School, instead of Latin School. We're still talking about those two schools, which are under-resourced today. I actually put out a plan 3 years ago. I'm the only candidate that put out a plan long before I was a candidate for mayor on how we could close these gaps, including those inequities. I live in Mattapan with my 2 boys. They have a 5% chance of getting into a high-quality Boston public school compared to some downtown neighborhoods where it's 80%. I don't just talk about the inequities. I've done the work, and it's the
I mean, honestly, part of it is how we rate schools.
Because of the inaction of the previous
Which is why some of these
administration on
stats
my
drive me
education
crazy,
plan.
though. I mean, there's
So are we
absolutely
on the
truth
right
into
path
some
right now
neighborhoods
with the way the schools are headed?
because
I
of
know
how
you
the
talked
choice
about
system
Mayor
works.
Denny
Is that a better
investing a certain
advantage
amount
of
of
getting
money
your kids
into
in a
public
quote-unquote
schools.
good
Does
school?
it matter exactly where that money is allocated, how it's spent, who it's spent on, to make sure it's equitable? Is it as simple as dividing it between schools, or is it more than that?
It's more than that. It has to be focused on equity.
that
And
was
we
a
have a
weird
real
question.
opportunity with ESSER funding to make sure that we are doing everything to lift our children up and make sure that they have success in school and beyond school for college and career. And it involves all of us, our teachers, our school leaders. We need to make sure that our parents are engaged, that they are also partners in education for their children.
Thank you
That is
again.
the work that we need to ensure happens
I don't know
every
how to
single day
silence
for
that.
every single child, regardless of what zip code you live in. Every child deserves a great school. That is the work I've dedicated my career to, lifting up children and families and working together to advocate for better schools for every single person in our city.
I think we can all at least agree the kids deserve the best when
Absolutely.
it comes to school.
Oh,
and the
we
best
all agree
opportunities.
on the kids.
All right, we could talk about school all day. We're gonna move on to climate change right now.
Oh,
'cause
come
this
on,
is
you're not gonna ask
something that
about
has come
exam
up a lot.
schools?
It's been a busy storm season, frankly, in our area. From Fred to Henri and Hurricane Ida, the remnants, which
Henri.
absolutely devastated parts of the Northeast, killed dozens of people in New York and in the tri-state area. And if that storm had made one quick turn, that easily could have been us up here dealing with
Yeah.
that serious
Or
amount
if
of
it,
flooding.
if
We
it
did have
hit
plenty of
like
flooding
8
on
hours
Maine.
later when it
So
hit like
let's
the
take another
lunar
question right now.
tide,
This
that
one is
would have
from
been
one of our
bad.
viewers. Suzanne Morse wants to know, how will the candidates make Boston more resilient to climate change, and will they each commit to act quickly to address climate change?
I mean, this is a viewer, but
Councilor
every single
Salvatore,
person is
I'm
going to
gonna
say,
give it to you.
yes, I commit to act quickly.
Climate action is so important in our city. And when
You
we
gotta
think
listen
about
to
the
harbor
work that we
plans
need
and
to
public
do
transit.
to
Those are the two key
engage
terms.
Some of our most disproportionately impacted families, community members, residents across our city, we need to act quickly as it relates to environmental injustices they're experiencing. For too long, our communities of color in particular have been left out of the conversation. And we've listened to the affluent communities, affluent folks from other places telling us what we need to do here in this city. Certainly, we have to act quickly around sea level rise, around tree canopy coverage, around the impacts of asthma for our kids. I taught and coached in East Boston, and day after day at softball practice, we'd be looking at the tail end of an airplane. And then we ask ourselves, why is asthma such a big problem for the kids in East Boston? We have work to do today, and we need to make sure that our city's residents are at the
Are you
table
saying we
for
should
that
close Logan
conversation.
Airport?
Councilor Wu, are we doing enough yet?
We need to do a whole lot more quickly. Climate justice is racial and economic justice. It is the urgent threat that is at our doorsteps and going to be the lens through which we see the world for the next 100 years. The horrific images that we saw in New York with the storms of subways flooded, families who lost their lives, poor working class immigrant families who couldn't afford the mitigation. Boston needs to be prepared right now for that. I'm proud to have earned the endorsement of every single climate group that has weighed in this race for a vision and an actionable plan that centers the ways in which our issues all tie together with a plan for Boston to lead the way. We see it across our neighborhoods, the heat that has made outdoor work dangerous day after day in our summer, the flooding, the more intense rain, the difference in temperature between shaded parts of our city, West Roxbury with a tree canopy and Roxbury with asphalt, 10 degrees difference. This is an urgent issue of public health, of safety, of opportunity, and we are standing in the gap for the future that our kids will inherit from us.
How do you
We're going to
implement
lead the
that
way.
now? I mean, you talk about the subways in New York and the video of the water just gushing down. I mean, we have an old infrastructure.
That's
the
a very
T-system.
nice setup
I mean,
for
even if you take
MBTA.
office tomorrow, what do you do so that the next storm that blows through doesn't do the same thing up here?
There's a $500 million plus coming to Boston through the federal relief funds to mitigate and address the impacts of the pandemic. And these are very much tied to resiliency in our buildings. We need to ensure that Boston leads the way. I'm proud to support a piece of legislation that the City Council is debating right now, filed so that our new construction will be meeting the highest standards for resiliency. This is a personal issue that at the city level we can take many actions on: converting to electric school buses, planting trees, ensuring our stormwater infrastructure is solid. This is the issue that will shape our kids' future and their kids as well.
I think about the seaport.
All right, well, I'm disappointed Michelle didn't mention that the number one thing that Boston has to do for climate resiliency is to protect our shores and to stop allowing development and to actually shore up for climate resiliency along our coastal shores. She should have hit that, but that's all right.
It starts with making sure that we take care of Boston's most vulnerable entry points from the ocean, the 4-Point Channel. We know if the 4-Point Channel was to flood today and Dorchester Bay was to flood, we would have a river running between our city. Bye-bye South Boston and all that public housing, bye-bye South End, Chinatown.
Columbia
So
Point.
many of our neighborhoods would have problems. The flash flooding that we saw in New York and New Jersey would be what would happen here. Poor immigrant families living in basement apartments who lost their lives. As mayor, we need to make sure that we have money to bring those $20 billion of actions to reality now. I would work with the federal government. The Biden administration's infrastructure bill is a really important tool, once-in-a-lifetime tool.
Wow, mentioning the infrastructure bill.
All right, Mr. Barros, thank you. We're going to.
That's actually a good move by him. I mean, the people who are watching this right now are mostly just people who watch MSNBC.
We are going to regroup. We are just getting started,
Oh,
but
cool, I
we still
get a
have a
break.
lot of ground to cover for you tonight. When we return, we are taking you to the heart of our city's streets.
All right.
and the ongoing-
It's funny because I'm reading the comments and there seems to be a massive delay between the people on YouTube and the people on Facebook. But it seems like the Facebook is a lot more live than the YouTube, to be honest. All right, so, I mean, initial thoughts. Right now, it's so hard for me to take polling seriously, but it seems, knock on wood, almost inevitable, almost for certain, as much as these things can be, that Michelle Wu will make it out of the prelims. And so tonight is really about the other candidates being Anissa, Andrea, and Kim. John Barros does not have a chance to try to differentiate themselves and to try to pick up a couple points. And watch, you're going to see, if you're watching me live, all you're going to see right now is campaign ads. Anissa's was before the debate. Now we have Kim. I bet you Andrea and Michelle will have one too. And, I mean, Michelle is the easiest path right now. And that is just for her to be herself, do what she always does. Do not take shots at Kim Janey. Do not take shots at any of the other candidates. And just make her seem like the most knowledgeable, calm, confident, friendly, relatable candidate on the stage. Oh, here we go. Andrea's ad is now following Kim Janey's. And Andrea and Kim have been bashing each other for the last 2 days. Andrea's been bashing Kim for weeks now, and that's what she needs to do politically. The moment Kim Janey announced in this race, I think Kim Janey became the front runner. It looks like, I'll talk about that at the end, about how the role of incumbency has shaped up to be a double-edged sword for Kim. But Andrea needs to differentiate herself from Kim Janey, and she needs to highlight that she is the better candidate where it comes to the people of Dorchester, Mattapan, Roxbury, Rosendale, who there was an effort to consolidate around Kim Janey that seems to have fallen through. But all right, we're back.
September 14th, right around the corner. We hit the streets of Boston to ask people what issues they care about, and the most popular topic was Mass and Cass. It's an area
Oh, this
long
would be
known
good.
for its problems. The stretch of Mass Ave is covered in needles, tents, trash, and riddled with crime.
Yeah, because a
Fabiola Jean
nonprofit
is a young
wanted to
mom
open
living in
up
Roxbury.
housing, providing housing and treatment for people there. And instead, our elected officials joined a community group and bashed it.
Right there. I mean, like, what are we doing when you're trying to get some aid from a hospital and you have people with the needles threatening to stick you up? I mean, we're dealing with something like, what are we going to do? What are you going to do?
All right, candidates, you heard her. What are you going to do? Councilor Campbell, let's begin with you.
Thank you for this question and also asking a question about this other public health crisis in the city of Boston. COVID is one, of course, but this is the other, and of course, it's only getting worse and moving into other downtown neighborhoods and other neighborhoods across the city. This area is near and dear to me. I grew up on Mass Ave. We were poor, we didn't have much of anything, but we didn't have needles in our parks, we didn't have needles on the street, we definitely didn't have bodies on the ground, and you didn't know if the person's dead or alive. That is the
Which is why we
state
need
of
safe
affairs in the
injection
city of
sites.
Boston right now.
Somebody bring
which
it up.
everyone should be absolutely concerned about. I was the first candidate to put out a plan on how we could tackle this issue back in January. Our previous mayor was still here. I sent letters, advocated with the previous mayor, the governor, the current administration to implement that plan. I am still pushing the acting mayor and the administration to take action. We don't need any more rhetoric. My plan is specific. It has appoint a mass and cast chief, someone to oversee this issue, work to decentralize services, create a responder unit.
Yeah,
right
that
now,
whole
everyone's working in
decentralization
silos.
thing, I gotta talk
Come
about
together
later.
to work together to ensure folks have services so we can actually decentralize. Reactivate Long Island, not just with the bridge, ferry service. I was the first candidate to call for ferry service. I'm still waiting for action. I can't implement this as a city councilor. It has to be driven by the mayor's office.
Mayor Janey, is that a fair plan to implement?
So let me just say this, it goes beyond an intersection. This isn't about an intersection in our city. This is about individuals who are in need of support and services. And I come at this from a very personal perspective. In the 1980s, my uncle was found dead with a needle in his arm. And in the 1980s, addiction was treated as a crime. We have learned a lot since then. And now we view this as a public health problem. And it is a crisis. And we know that this has been a crisis for the last 10 years, and certainly since the bridge came down in 2014. And COVID has made this worse. But my team is connecting people to services every single day. This year alone, 1,600 individuals were referred into treatment. This is a challenge. We need to make sure that there is a regional approach. It can't continue to fall all on Boston. We have to decentralize. We have to make sure that all of our city departments, as well as partnering with the DA's office, which we are doing, to ensure that those who would prey against vulnerable people in our city are held accountable. There is much more we need to do.
She just talked about how we tried to
invested
treat
money in the
opioids and
FY22 budget
addiction
to make sure
through
that we
punishment,
have
and now she's
a good
pivoting towards the
plan
people
to
who
help
sell
people get off the
opioids and
streets,
drugs
into
should be
homes, and
punished.
into treatment.
It certainly is individuals. This is a unique situation in that it's also located in one spot. I mean, you heard the young woman. People avoid that area. They don't want to be able to walk down the street there with their children when there are needles on the ground.
Yeah, that's why we need
Counselor
safe injection
Sally George,
sites, and we
what
need
would
to
your plan be
provide
clean it up?
Well, I started this work.
housing
when I joined the
first
council in
policies which provide housing and
2016
then
under
offer
leadership
treatment to
then
those
of
who wish it.
Former council president Wu. With me, we started a committee on homelessness, mental health, and recovery. And we were focused on repairing the continuum of care, bringing together officials at the city level, at the state level, an agency, as well as community-based organizations to do that work. Unfortunately, then Council President Janey didn't think that committee deserved to exist anymore.
Ooh.
Since then,
Bashing
things have
Kim
fallen
Janey
apart
again.
and have come to a breaking point. We need to certainly decentralize services in that area, continue to offer support and
I'm gonna keep
outreach
using
to
that
people who are
word.
not well, who are sick, who are looking for recovery, and make sure that we are responding to the public health crisis and the public safety crisis. 2 weeks ago, the Boston Police Department issued a search warrant on a tent. We have seen over the last few weeks a proliferation of tents. One evening I was down there and counted 100+ tents. We are not serving the people who are most vulnerable, and we are not supporting
There is an
the residents
empty
in that area or those that are
hotel
going to work
right in
every
this
day.
area
We've got
that has
work to do.
200
Where's
rooms.
that balance? You need to help the people who have problems. There are hardworking people who live in that area who are trying to raise children. Where's the balance? How do you strike it?
It's not a
Yeah, I'll tell
balance.
you,
What
I'm
are
one
you
of those
talking
hardworking
about?
people living in that area trying to raise 4 children. And every time I drive by the area with my kids in the car, I've got one kid, Jeremiah, will say, "Dad, did we bring money to give to people who are going to ask us for money?" And John on the other side will say, "Well, Dad, I don't know if we need to give them money because they're going to use drugs." This is a complex issue, but it needs leadership.
It's actually
It
not
needs
really that
action.
complex.
We know
This
the
really
plan, yet
isn't
we're
that
not doing
complex to
anything.
solve.
What we do, we close the engagement center. That's not leadership. That's not the action we need. The place is more violent. There are more people. It's dirtier. And we need people, if the elected officials in office right now can't take care of it, we need more elected and better elected officials in office to do it. That's why, as mayor, I will make sure that we have a multidisciplinary 24-hour team on the streets right now with personalized services for the people who need help. I talked to a gentleman there the other day named LeVar. He is doing a workforce development program. He's taking a class at Benjamin Franklin Institute, but feels nobody's trying to help him get his life back together. These are people who need help. And as the mayor of Boston, I'll make sure they get that help.
Councilor Wu.
He's actually having a
part of the
decent night, to be
aforementioned
honest.
Group that did try to do something about this previously. Is that still a plan that you would implement?
I have joined community members, residents, small business owners, patients in that area to walk through the area around Mass Ave and Melia Cass many, many times. And when you're there, the feeling you get is the worst of all about government, that it feels like we've given up. That as long as everything stays in one area of the city, we will look the other way. That is unacceptable. And we need to bring accountability and action to this. It's not that the city's not putting resources there. In fact, we have been putting more and more city dollars into that area, sweeping the streets now multiple times a day, city workers working so hard, going to pick up needles as quickly as possible. And yet the next morning, we're right back where we started. That funding, that energy, that programming has to go to action that will get to root causes. This is fundamentally
Ask Michelle
a
again
public
about that
health
Victory
and
Programs
housing
policy.
crisis.
I think that's
So I'll
what
work with
the
our community
moderator
health
was
centers
referring
to expand
to.
treatment across the city and the region. And within my first 100 days, I will look at every single city-owned building and parcel to identify where we could quickly locate supportive housing that could relieve.
Okay, she mentioned supportive housing.
You
Okay.
know, Councilor Wu is right, which is why we are looking at
I'm
a
happy.
regional approach. This can't just fall
See,
on Boston.
This is the most frustrating part. Somebody challenged Kim Janey on
other
this.
parts of our Commonwealth. And that is the work we have to do to decentralize.
You see how Kim Janey, as acting mayor right now, is saying, no, we need a regional approach. We need other mayors to help.
Who are afraid to come
Come
to
on,
work.
that's such
This
a
is
layup.
real issue for them. But we can't
Someone-
lose sight
someone on that
of the
stage challenge her on that
individuals who are
point.
dealing with
You're the
substance
mayor, you
use
have to take
disorder,
responsibility.
with mental health challenges. When we talk about a city council committee, the committee that I formed was on public health. And 6 weeks later, we were hit with a global pandemic. We put all of the health committee work together in one committee. And fortunately, we did that. And we have to make sure that we recognize this as a crisis as well. And we need our state and other municipal leaders across the Commonwealth.
No,
to
not
step
good
up
enough.
as
You're the
well.
mayor.
I
Somebody
want to
say
sort
it.
of continue that thought and move on to our next question as well, involving the housing crisis right now in Boston. So we're going to take another question from one of our media partners here. This question comes from Bay State Banner reader Kristen
Bay
Halbert.
State Banner.
I have been losing neighbors left and right and going away parties every single week this whole summer. I want
That's
to know
very
how
sad.
the candidates will keep Black families in Boston and also support those who were displaced and want to come back.
All right, so a clear example there of how
Abolish
people are
the
being priced out of the
BPDA.
city. It's too expensive. They have to leave even though they actually want to be here. So Mayor Janey, we'll begin with you. What do you have to say to Kristen?
Hi, Kristen. I'm somebody who experienced housing insecurity growing up here in the city of Boston. I lived in subsidized housing, spent time in a shelter, got my first apartment with a Section 8 voucher. And I bring that lived experience, that lens, that urgency to this work as mayor. Within my first week in office as mayor of Boston, invested $50 million in rental relief. So far, we've helped 3,400 households. 70% are people of color. 37% are Black, 26% Latino. We've got more work to do. It is why I'm also investing in foreclosure prevention. It's why I did an eviction moratorium here in the city of Boston. When at the federal level, the courts struck it down, I made sure that I stood up for the residents of Boston to keep people in their homes. And we're doing more to invest to make sure that people can live out the American dream. I've quadrupled down payment assistance, taking it from $10,000 to $40,000. That is what we need to do to make sure that we are stabilizing our communities and keeping people in our Boston who want to call Boston home.
Yeah, you want people here who want to be
Good
here,
answer
and that's,
politically,
the essence
though
of a
obviously
city, right?
that does
It just
not
seems like there's such a
address how to
disparity between,
change the fundamental
between the
problems
poor
with housing
and
in
the
Boston.
rich,
But
particularly
politically,
in
that was a good
Boston,
answer
and
by
there's
Kim
not a whole
Janey.
lot in between, and those people need so much help to continue to be able to afford the housing. So what's the plan, Councillor?
The plan is to shrink that wealth gap and eliminate it. We know the disparities between white families at $250,000, Black family at $8, and a Latino family at $0. We've got to close that wealth gap and end it. It starts with home ownership. I'm committed to investing up to $1 million in my first 6 months as mayor, and I'd love to get
$1 million buys you 1 and 1/3 condos.
here in the city of Boston
The
to support our
idea
residents.
that
But
you
when we
can
think
solve
about,
this
and we just
problem
saw in the
through
results of the
housing
latest
and
census
house
survey,
ownership
the
is
departure of
ridiculous
too
and
many
a
of our
lie.
Black families. It's about the cost of housing in this city. We need greater affordability. We also need to create more opportunity for our workforce development, for the creative economy, for our schools. Families leave the city because they don't have access to the things that they need. Our education system, our transit system, our economic system, our workforce system, it is all an important part of that, and it starts with creating ownership opportunities within the housing
Can never do it
market
on
across
scale.
our city.
But I mean, I know politically it's the right thing to
What would you
say.
say to Kristen?
Cannot happen on scale.
I understand,
Impossible.
frankly. You know, I grew up in public housing behind 1850 Washington. Now I'm a first-time homeowner in Mattapan. My housing plan is specific, and it's the most specific and actionable on day one than any other candidate. And it says that every single family in the city of Boston should have access to that same pathway that I had growing up in the city of Boston. But in addition to that, we need to make sure we're building, of course, housing that is a pricing points residents can afford, building housing for our veterans, our seniors who are also being displaced. The city of Boston has incredible power to do that. But in addition, I'm the only candidate with the most significant record of accomplishment
I think
on this
Andrea
issue.
has used that
Many
phrase
candidates talk about
4 times
activating
tonight,
vacant
3
lots.
times.
I've done that. I have 30 city-owned vacant lots right now on Blue Hill Ave being activated. I tell folks, drive down Blue Hill Ave, being activated right now, including for supportive housing to help those dealing with the opioid crisis at Mass and Cass. I didn't forget about folks living in public housing. I brought a program into the Public Housing Authority that is moving folks out of poverty into homeownership opportunities. It took me 2 years to do that as a city councilor. If I were mayor, it would have taken me 30 days. My first piece of legislation on the council
How many
was the Community
how many
Preservation
people?
Act.
Give me numbers on
It's
how many people
generating
went through that
$20
program.
million every single year, including to create more affordable housing. That leadership won't change.
$20 million
I've done the work,
buys
and my
you,
plan is quite specific
call
on
it
how to make sure
30
every family can afford to stay here and to
houses.
thrive and become homeowners just like I did.
All right,
Shannon, let me
yes.
just say, just today, I was invited to participate from the White House as a mayor who has a model for the rest of the country in terms of what we were doing here in Boston
Oh,
to
I didn't know that.
stabilize housing. The eviction moratorium, $50 million in rental relief. 34 households have been helped thus far. 70%
34?
of people
I
of
think she meant
color.
3,400.
We
She
do
said
have
that
a
stat
down
earlier.
payment assistance program for first-time home buyers. I've quadrupled it, taking it from $10,000 to $40,000. That is why the White House invited
And
me
that will
as
only
one of
help
a number of
families
mayors
who are already on the
participated,
bubble,
a
who can
small
already
handful,
afford
because we are doing the work
$650,000
to keep
homes.
people in
And
their
now that
homes
extra 40
here in
gets
the
you
city of
closer to
Boston.
the actual
Of
price.
course, we had a housing
Cannot
crisis
happen on
long
scale.
before COVID-19. We have income inequality long before COVID. COVID has made these issues worse. But my leadership, we are going to get through, and we're going to get through together.
You can tell Kristen to tell her friends that they have a chance at coming back
They
if they
have
want to
a
be back in the
chance.
city of Boston. I want to move on to.
And
Oh,
just on the housing question.
Thank you. I was going to say, let Michelle
I
mention
just wanna lift up
BBDA.
that, as we've seen in the pandemic, housing is health, housing is opportunity, housing is safety, and this is the most urgent issue that we are hearing from community members all across Boston. We know that nearly 2/3 of our residents are renters, and 1/3 almost of renters are paying more than half their income every year.
Oh, you're
to
gonna
just
mention
try
rent
to keep a
control
roof
on
over their
NBC?
head. It is not a sustainable way to live, and that is why families are getting pushed out. My housing plan includes using every tool in the toolbox for city leverage to build more housing, look at city-owned property, add housing on top of that, simplify our processes. But it is not enough simply to say that we will create more housing and wait for that to help. This is an emergency situation right now in Boston. I'm the only candidate in this field willing to fight for every tool, including rent stabilization, to address the
okay.
immediate
Well, she changed it to
impact,
rent
the immediate emergency
stabilization.
displacement in our communities. That is what we need as we're addressing this housing crisis.
I don't like the
I have a
change in the
track record
term,
of standing with
but
tenants,
I'm-
with residents, taking on big corporations that were driving up
I
rents.
may have advised her
and
not to
setting a
mention
national
that on
plan
NBC.
To show how Boston can lead.
All right,
But
we're gonna
hey,
move on to
all
this
right.
next question here.
Some,
sort of a social
swinging
justice
for it.
question. The murder of George Floyd sparked a racial reckoning in America, but also raised a lot of questions about police
Oh,
here
this is
in our
gonna be
local
good.
communities. The question is, where do you stand on defunding the police?
You better
And
let
I'll open
Andrea
up the floor
talk.
here for
Andrea
anyone who
probably
wants
is
to
the
begin.
strongest on this, to be honest.
I'll start because I've been leading on public safety as the chair of
Told you.
public safety and criminal justice for the council for the last 6 years.
Okay.
I tell folks long before George Floyd and that painful murder that we all experienced, long before, of course, the Patrick Rose case, which is a horrific case in the city of Boston, I knew our police department needed incredible work to become the most transparent and accountable in the nation. I have done that work. I drafted the legislation that created the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, working with our previous mayor and his task force to get that done. I've shown up in court against one of our patrolman unions to implement body cameras, which everyone agreed, including officers. It was a great accountability tool. I've done that work, and my plan builds upon that leadership. And it's the most comprehensive and specific plan out of any candidate in this race. And it says two things. I want to transform our response to public safety. I don't want to just reduce incidents of violence in the city of Boston. I want to eradicate them. And how do we do that? By actually restructuring our police department in such a way that we send officers, particularly those in specialized units, back to the districts so that every neighborhood has adequate coverage and enough officers to actually walk the beat and do community policing. And the benefit of that, we will save millions of dollars from the $400 million budget,
No one has ever given
overtime
me
budget,
a
and be
proper
able to
definition of community
redirect those
policing.
resources to
That's
the root
mostly like
causes of violence,
a mystical
mental health,
1950s
poverty, trauma.
memory
No
of
other
what
candidate
people
has such
saw
a
Lee
comprehensive plan,
Beaver.
and no one has exercised the political courage to take on this issue. And I've done
Oh,
it.
you
and I've
didn't
continued to do
mention
it, yes,
cutting
as a vice
the
mayor of the
Boston
city of
Police
Boston.
Shannon, let me
Department.
tell you
Andre, I'm
about
a little
my
disappointed,
plan.
but I also would
The plan
advise
that
not
I
to
have
have
put in
mentioned it
place
on
has
NBC.
homicides down by 32%. It has fatal shootings down by 50%. It has gun arrests up by 26%. We are reimagining policing here in the city of Boston. And even with those numbers
All these like
trending in the
6-month
right
crime
direction,
trends
that
is
little
ridiculous
comfort
to cite.
to anyone who has lost a loved one to gun violence. I experience gun violence where I live on my street on a regular basis. I've lost count how many times someone has been shot in front of my house. This issue is real. I live with the trauma, as do many residents across our city. And my plan has been working, but we've got to do more. It is why I invested in the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency to make sure that we are doing that work. It is why I
If someone
launched
can
a
name me
pilot
one
of
actionable
mental
thing that
health
committee
to
has
how we
done,
respond to crisis
I'll
in our
Venmo
city,
you.
making sure that
I think
there
it
is
just
a
got
co-response,
staffed like a
an
month ago.
alternative response and a community response, because it is not enough just to have empty rhetoric. We have to reimagine how we do this work.
I would love
Shannon,
to
I
respond to that.
just, if
Mr.
I could-
Harris, I'm going to let you, you're raising 4 kids in this city. Do you feel that Mayor Janey's plan is working?
I'm not sure what Mayor Janey's plan is. I'd love for her to point to a plan. She doesn't have a plan. Check her website out. We've asked for a plan. In fact, she had said she was going to put out a plan and never got one out in her own timeline. She had said that she was
Shannon,
going to do a
released
plan.
my summer safety
She is
plan
quoting.
last
She
week.
is
And then I'll
quoting.
give you a chance to talk.
She is quoting data on work that the Walsh administration did. In fact, we know during the 7 years of the Walsh administration that crime was down and arrests were down. It wasn't a coincidence. It was because we helped to attract more than 140,000 new jobs to the city, good jobs. We helped to invest in the root causes of violence, making sure that we had supports for trauma. We helped to move people into affordable housing. Under the Walsh administration,
He's
the
actually
city of
doing a
Boston
really good
now
job
has
tonight.
more affordable housing
I
by
bash him
percentage,
just because
by
of how
proportion
bad
than
he's
any
doing
other
in the
city
polls,
America.
and he had a horrible
That's the
article
work
on
of
rent
supporting
control.
families that help
He's having a good night,
safe
though.
cities. That's why the mayor is able to talk about those numbers, not because of a plan that she doesn't have.
She inherited them, is what you're saying?
So
inherited it, and-
before?
We released our plan
Yes.
at the headquarters of the police department. I did so with District Attorney Rachel Rollins. The numbers that I just quoted are comparing 2021 to 2020.
Yeah, as I was gonna say,
Obviously,
I actually
it
think
isn't
she's
enough.
right,
This
John,
isn't
to be
about
honest.
data points.
I'm
We need to
also
do
just
more to
criticizing
make
the use
sure
of
that we
6-month
don't see
crime
violence
data
at
is
all.
useless
And beyond
in any
that,
sort of
it means we have
analysis.
to address
There wasn't a
trauma
single
in our
measurable
community.
action
It
that was
means we
taken
need
that you can then
economic
say, because of this
opportunities
action,
and
it
schools that
resulted
work.
in
That
X.
is the work that I have focused on my entire career, long before I was an elected official. That is the work that we are continuing in my administration.
Not to diminish, but I will point out that 2020 to 2021 was a pandemic year, and then slowly coming out of the pandemic, which may or may
Yeah,
not
that
have an effect on those numbers. But
I mean, it was a little bit different
Let's compare to
in
the
all
5-year
cities
average as well.
across the country.
So,
Some
2021
across the
compared to
nation,
the 5-year
crime went up,
average.
violent crime, as
I'd love
measured
to
by
jump in
like
and just say,
robberies,
as a
murders,
mom,
rapes.
I will do whatever it
Nationwide,
takes
it went
to
up.
make
Here in
sure
Boston,
that
it
our streets
decreased.
are
But again,
safe
looking at
throughout our
crime,
city.
like 6-month
I
data,
have
it's meaningless. You
on
can't
our
get
streets
anything
after
real
an
about
incident
what
of violence in
happened
our
and why.
community, meeting with residents. I have stood as a caregiver for my own mom who lives with mental illness with her in episodes of delusion and paranoia when the police were called, terrified about how that interaction could go. We need a wholesale new approach to the structures of our police department and the culture of how we interact with residents to build trust.
Someone
across our
mentioned the cops
communities.
beating the shit out of
We
protesters
know
during
that these
the
issues
George
are not
Floyd
new.
protests.
Activists and community members have been talking about them for years. I'm the only candidate focused on the ways in which city government has real leverage in delivering change, which is the underlying police union contract. We are now a year with an expired contract. I'm the only candidate with a plan to describe how we can use this for accountability, transparency, and shifting to a public health-led approach.
I just
We have to leave that
quickly-
one there at this point. We could do the whole debate.
I think that
will
the
give you
viewers would
20
love to
seconds 'cause
hear
you have-
my
well,
position on the police
haven't had a
budget.
chance
Let's see if
public
Anissa says,
safety.
"I will
I'm the
not
candidate
defund the
on this stage,
police."
on this panel this evening, who is committed to investing in public safety for our city. I've done the work around reimagining how we interact with and support our residents.
A lot of
who are at
imagining.
greatest
Everyone
need.
uses that
When I joined the
phrase.
council in 2016, I moved from 2 social workers who are participating in co-response to 4. 2.5 years ago, I moved to 19. We have professionals in place to support our most at-risk
We only have
residents.
19
have to do that.
counselors for the
All of
entire
us here
city.
agree in transparency and accountability. I will uphold as mayor the promise of community policing and make sure that our Boston Police Department is working in partnership with our community members, with our city's residents, with our community-based organizations who are doing such important work.
Oh.
As mayor, I am committed to having a safe city, not defunding public safety in this city.
Okay, I was gonna
We
say,
can
that's a
talk about
layup for you,
reallocation.
Anissa, for
We can
you to
talk
say you
about
will not
reinvestment.
defund the police.
That's just another word for defunding public safety in this city.
All right, Councilor Savage George, thank you. We're going to move on to the rapid fire section. So
Ooh, that'll be
stretch out a little
fun.
bit, take a breath. A lot of these responses, by the way, can be just a simple yes or no or a one-word answer, but the point is to keep it quick and keep it moving. So what I'm going to do is basically sort of go down the line. A few of them will be for all of you, and I'll note which ones those are when they are. Mr. Barros, I'll begin with you. If this were a ranked choice vote style election, you could vote for one other candidate besides yourself, who would it be?
Bullet vote. Oh,
I'd probably write in my wife. She's amazing.
yeah. No one's gonna
on the
answer
stage
that,
right now.
honestly.
Amazing, though, Shannon.
What a pointless
Pick one of these
question.
women.
No, I'm running against a historic field here of strong women, and I'm proud to be running.
Yeah, no one's gonna answer that. This is like, how well can you BS?
Let's see. Councilor Campbell. I can't make him say someone if he's not going to say it. So,
Yeah, no one's
Sorry,
gonna
you're at
answer
the
this
City Hall
question.
For your first day as the new mayor, and you have to take the T. Are you confident you're going to get there on time?
Not coming from Mattapan on the Red Line, no, I'm not. And I also live in a section of the city where there's a transit desert. So no.
Mayor Janey, do you think employees need to come back to work in person downtown for the city to survive?
You know, we have to reimagine what we're going to have in our city. We know
can't.
workplace has changed. It has changed. Obviously, we need workers to come back, but everyone may not come back. Some people are going to work remotely. And so we've got to attract people to our city in
right.
other new ways, creative ways.
This is
using
for
the arts.
everybody.
think
Raise your
the
hand
answer
if
should
you
have been
have.
no.
Have you ever been a customer at one of the new local pot shops?
Andrea and Kim raised their hands.
Again, for all of you, with a show of hands, how many of you are vaccinated?
Oh, that would have been.
Okay. Councilor
They're all
Wu,
vaccinated.
you're moving to East Boston. Are you confident your climate change plan will keep that neighborhood viable for your children, yes or no?
Yes, our plan is the most practical,
Yeah, of
feasible,
course.
and East Boston will be at the epicenter of making sure everyone is safe and resilient.
right.
I'm
What do you
saying
think
both
she
of
would
them.
say to
Councilor
that? No, my
George,
plan will not be
Do you
enough.
support a plastic bottle ban in the city of Boston?
No.
Okay. Well done. And we're going to move on. We're nearing the end of tonight's debate, unfortunately. As mentioned, we drew names to decide the order of the closing statements. So, Councilor Wu,
I don't know.
you
Do
are
people
once
want to
again
listen to the
first
closing
up, and you have
statements?
30
These,
seconds.
these are the openings.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in today and for being part
I'll
of
judge-
this
I'll
historic
judge how well they do.
conversation that we've been having in the city of Boston. I've been so humbled to serve the entire city of Boston for 8 years now as an at-large councilor, to work for Mayor Menino in City Hall before that, to know what is possible in our city when we are all at the table. This is a moment where we need that leadership. The next 3 to 5 years and the decisions that we make will shape the next 3 to 5 generations. So there are many more plans on my website. Please check it out at michelleforboston.com, and I very respectfully ask for your vote September 14th.
Councilor Wu, thank you. Mayor Janey, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the sponsors again. I want to thank the candidates on this stage and all of the viewers watching. As mayor of Boston, I have led this city through a lens of equity, justice, and love, making sure that we could reopen our city, keeping crime down, keeping people in their homes. I know we can't go back to normal. We have to go better. This is our opportunity to make sure we are creating a stronger Boston.
Can't go
a
back,
Boston
go
that's more
better.
equitable,
Curious
more
who wrote
just,
that line.
more resilient.
Mayor Janey, thank you very much. Councilor Campbell, 30 seconds.
Thank you, everyone, for having me. Of course, thank you to the sponsors. I deeply love the city of Boston. This is the city that took a poor girl from Roxbury and gave me everything I would need to be successful. When I do this work, and of course this run for mayor, it has always been about ensuring that every single resident in this city has access to the same opportunity I had growing up here, whether you're native born or you got here this morning. And I have taken on the issues, I have done the work. It's the reason the Boston Globe endorsed my candidacy.
Oh, there
that
we go.
leadership won't change.
A lot of
I hope to
Boston
earn
Globe
your vote
readers
on September
who
14th. You can
watch
learn more
NBC.
about me at
So there you go.
andreacampbell.org.
And she remembered to mention her website. Good for her.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for joining tonight. I was 14 when my aunt first invited me to a neighborhood cleanup. And I learned that people working together can make great things happen, can make positive change. Every day since, I've been working to help improve this city for everyone. I have led, I have advocated, and most importantly, I've gotten things done. On day one, I will bring this city together to make sure that we move forward towards prosperity and justice. Vote for me on September 14th.
Mr.
Thank
Barros, thank you very much.
All right,
And
one more.
Councilor George.
No, thank you very much. As mayor, I'll lead all of Boston. You won't find me on a soapbox. You'll find me in your neighborhoods, as I have been as an at-large city councilor. I'll lead not with fancy talk, but with hard work. I'll lead responsibly and responsively to the people of Boston. You deserve that. I'll lead bringing us together on issues of housing, schools, and safety. And I will be the teacher, the mother, and the mayor.
Began and ended
My name
with
is
I'm a
Anissa
teacher.
Savvy George, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And that concludes tonight's Boston mayoral debate here at the NBC.
All right, that's
Media Center.
done.
We want to thank
I'm
all
gonna
our
lower
guests
this.
for coming
I'm gonna
today.
zoom in.
You for
Thank you to the
joining us.
people who joined me on that. And all right, overall, my read of how people did. I mean, no one did anything disastrous. They spent a lot of the time, as I knew they would, bashing Kim Janey. So if anything, that probably hurt her the most, just because the more she's on stage, the more of an opportunity she is to take punches. Also, Michelle Wu is now doing an ad on NBC, so that's almost a hat trick. I don't actually think John Barros has enough money to do a last-minute political ad. Followed by Kim Janey is now airing. So yeah, I mean, yeah, Kim Janey probably did the worst, but that was, I mean, not necessarily her fault. That's one of the problems of being the incumbent. So I'm going to give my predictions of what's going to happen on Tuesday. I just loaded up the TikTok. If people have comments that like they're a little out of order, I'm not going to scroll up, but people on different channels have been messaging them, so please feel free, and then I'll answer questions as long as people have them, I guess. Let me just say now early voting has started everywhere. You can go to any polling location, any early polling location across the city. You just say what district you are and all that good stuff, and then they hand you the right ballot. If you want to wait until Tuesday, you can. So on Tuesday, if you are listening to this in any format, you know who I want you to support. If you are in District 4, vote for Joel Richards. If you are in District 6, vote for Kendra Hicks. If you are in Somerville, then Tessa Bridge and Becca Miller for your ward seats. Now, and for mayor in Boston, I want you to vote Michelle Wu. What do I think will happen with the mayoral race? I think right now the polls have Michelle up huge. The most recent one, see if I can bring it up. I'm going to move your TikTok. Is around 31%, I think, for Michelle. And then it goes Kim Janey, I think 21, Anissa 20, Andrea 19. I might be knock everyone down, but they're all within 1 percentage point of each other, according to the most recent poll. And it has a 4-point margin of error, so no one knows. I think the most telling things are looking at the demographics of who is supporting who. Michelle Wu probably has the most reliable voters. I would say she has that camp, maybe Andrea, maybe Anissa, and I think Kim Janey has the least reliable. And one of the strongest metrics of who will be able to bring out their base is, one, the age of their base, because we know that older people vote a hell of a lot more than younger people will, and then also the education status. but that somewhat is a little misleading. So right now, Michelle Wu is the clear favorite where it comes to college educated. Anissa Asabi George and Kim Janey are the favorite for not college educated. Now that sounds a little counterintuitive because Anissa Asabi George is by far the most conservative in the race. She's going to draw from the conservative white vote. She's going to draw from the older population. And that is why when you hear non-college educated, those have to be separated in two different camps. Because people like my parents, people like many people's parents probably watching this, grandparents, they did not go to college. They did not need to go to college as a pathway to the middle class. And those people vote year after year, especially in municipal elections. So while Kim Janey and Anissa Asabi George both have that non-college educated pool, I think Anissa's voters are going to be a little bit older, a little bit more likely to vote than Kim Janey's. So having said all that, and I've been saying for a while that the moment Kim Janey announced she was going to be the favorite in the race, that necessarily hasn't come into fruition. I think that is mostly because of, one, just running a very poor campaign. There's like you have like a 30-point advantage if you're the incumbent, and that's not a made-up stat. I'm pretty sure there's studies on this. And I think she has failed to fully utilize the power of, I'll say mayor, you can say acting mayor if you want, to really boost your name recognition and to get out of ahead of a lot of bad press. Everyone knew that she'd be under attack because everyone, myself included, assumed she would be the favorite. Being in power, being an incumbent means that you are responsible. I think the dip in COVID, or I guess that you got to do that in the inverse, with the Delta variant, the rise of COVID infections, do we vaccinate mandate? Do we not? Do we go back to a mask mandate? Do we not? I think there was a lot of hesitancy within Kim Janey's administration. Some of this was not their fault, that things just went south, but she let herself vulnerable to being attacked. And that has absolutely been to her detriment. I mean, Andrea Campbell has been pounding her campaign for weeks now, trying to peel off her voters. Michelle Wu has been very critical of the lack of any sort of a vaccine mandate, as have others in the city council. There's been a lot of behind-the-scenes shenanigans where it comes to Kim Janey. I mean, we were supposed to have a special election. It would have been a shit show, and I was one of the people speaking that we should get rid of it. But a lot of that was politically motivated to move a special election, which would have happened per our city charter, I don't know, I'll say June. And by delaying it until September, that bought Kim Janey time to boost up her name recognition, to use the powers of the office to pass a few pilot programs that people like myself wanted. Also, there was the whole fiasco of not having any early voting locations in Michelle Wu's district in Chinatown, just showing a very clear favoritism from the administration to the campaign. And then also the Boston Globe came out with how if there was ever any inquiries by the press, they would tip off the campaign, and then the campaign would allow Kim Janey to get ahead of it. And so I think a lot of Boston City Councilors, a lot of people in Mass, Boss Polly, got very agitated at how she was using the power of mayor, and she just did not successfully utilize all the benefits of being the incumbent, and instead she just absorbed a lot of the negatives, which is when you have a target on your back. And if, I don't think this is going to happen, I'm about to give my predictions, but if Andrea Campbell and Kim Janey do not advance, do not make it out of the prelims, that is going to cause a lot of bad blood in Boston for years, if not a decade, because this has become very personal in terms of who do you support. If you want a strong black woman from Boston, who are you rallying behind? This got incredibly personal. It has from a lot of organizers, a lot of activists, and if both of them don't make it out, it's gonna be bad. Now, yes, it is recorded. It's on NBC. 10 Boston, this debate, and also I recorded it via my podcast, so you can listen to it there with my commentary. So what do I think will happen? I think things are going to be what I said in the beginning, months ago. Kim Janey and Michelle Wu will advance. I will allow the polling, and I think Michelle is just running a much stronger campaign than Kim Janey, so Michelle Wu will take first place. I don't think it's going to be at the margin that is currently the polling suggests, but I think Michelle Wu and Kim Janey advance. Andrea, Anissa, Barros all knocked out. From there, it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I think Michelle picks up a lot of Anissa voters. I think she picks up a lot, if not half, of Andrea's voters. And while I was very skeptical of how Michelle Wu would do in a general heads-up matchup, I don't know. The events of the last few weeks, Kim Janey's failure to consolidate, makes me a lot more optimistic that Michelle Wu is in a very strong position to win the general election in November. But one step at a time, I think she's going to come out with the win, number one, on this Tuesday. And to answer the question, on TikTok, yes. So the preliminary elections take the field and they whittle it down to the top two, and then those top two advance and they go head to head for the general election on November 2nd. And this is my usual reminder. If you are watching me on TikTok, I recommend following me on Twitch or Facebook or YouTube, because you can see the screen and I tend to make a lot more eye contact with you. So that's my prediction for the mayoral race. However, I also want it on record, just because this stuff is fun, why not, of who do I think is going to make it out, I gotta move you again, for the Boston City Council. Now, I'm not going to do the district seats. I really, really, fingers crossed, hope, believe that the two candidates from Boston DSA, Kendra Hicks, District 6, Joel Richards, District 4, will make it out. If you would like to get involved in their campaigns to ensure that happens, please, TikTok, please send me a DM. But in terms of the at-large, so there are 17 names. This is when it gets complicated. You get to pick one person for your district-level councilor, and then you get 4 votes for your at-large. There are 17 names on this list. I am going to give you them in somewhat reverse order of who I think is going to get knocked out. So I think, I'm going to quickly run through the bottom names. I think Roy Owens, gone. Donnie Palmer, gone. Nick Vance, gone. Bridget Nee Walsh, gone. Saeed, gone. James Coleman, gone. Dominguez DeRosa, gone. And actually, we're going to keep Dominguez up. So I just knocked out 6 people, and now I'm going to quickly go through the top 11. But I believe you're going to be in the top 8 to advance. So I have Dominguez DeRosa as getting knocked out in the 11th spot. He ran last year. He definitely picked up a lot of name recognition. However, he has stances that I support, and he has stances that I very much don't. He is very much against I believe it was the Victory nonprofit treatment, which was going to provide a housing first model for people in Mass and Cass, use an empty hotel that's right in the area to provide housing, to provide treatment. He's very much against that. And if you're against that, you don't have my vote, period. Next up, I have in the 10th spot somebody who I voted for, Carla Monterio. Has a great stance on housing, supports rent control. There may have been some drama, but if I don't know it, I can't imagine any voter knows it, to be honest. I loosely heard some things, but I voted for people that I trust, said that she should make the top 8. I don't have her getting out of the top 8. I have her getting knocked out of the prelims. John Spillane, I have him at 9th. I think he actually has a TikTok, so I know he follows me. I don't know much about him. Seems a little conservative. 8th spot, so I think that means that I think you will advance, is Kelly Bates. She has some good policies. I also know she follows me on TikTok. She got into some hot water, we'll call it, when the students from the Boston Public School Committee resigned. If people remember that whole drama. And they resigned in part because they were receiving this very weird sounding therapy that it sounds like Kelly Bates was one of the therapists in this program. And so she lost a lot of, we'll say, left energy, with Twitter energy, whatever. But I have her on the 8th spot. 7th, Alex Gray. He has stances that I view to be conservative. He's a lot more in line with like Erin Murphy, who I'll talk about, than he is anywhere to the left. Ruzi Lujan, who I have in the 6th spot for this. So again, everyone from Kelly up is who I think is going to make it out of the prelims. Ruzi has picked up a lot of the left energy, a lot of the Twitter energy, a lot of the endorsements. I think Elizabeth Warren has come out to endorse her. I also voted for her. Now, in the 5th spot, I have Althea Garrison. And Althea Garrison, it has a fancy word for it, and I forget what it is. But basically, she runs in every election, just constantly. Year after year, she's been doing it for decades. And by doing that, by constantly running, she continually increases her name recognition, which is 1, 2, and 3 of how you win any local race. Is do you have... You probably hear my roommates in the back, is do you have name recognition? So I have Althea coming in 5th for the prelim. I mean, she has been on the Boston City Council because she runs so much that like when people resign or leave, she just kind of gets bumped up automatically. In the 4th spot, I have David Halpert. He also ran 2 years ago. I actually knocked on his door to canvass him for Joel Richards. He has a lot of great policies. I think he'd be a fantastic Boston City Councilor. So I also voted for him. In the 3rd spot, Erin Murphy, conservative, probably. I mean, I don't know a lot of the people at the bottom that I listed, but she is probably going to be one of the worst Boston City Councilors should she get elected, and I think she will. At least I have her in 3rd, getting out of the prelims. And then for the top 2, I have the 2 incumbents. Julia Mejia, who I also voted for. She has a lot of great policies. I am still very disappointed in her budget vote from last year when she supported the police-friendly budget that Kim Janey passed. However, I think she still constitutes a top 4. And finally, I have Michael Flaherty, who has been on the council forever, has massive name recognition, so I have him coming out of the number 1 spot. And we'll evaluate the data. We'll see what happens. See how good my predictions are. And I plan on going live again next Wednesday. So we'll have all the results. We'll see what did I get right, what did I get wrong, what happened, what does it mean for the future of the general election, and all that fun stuff. And if you have any questions, now's the time. I'm not seeing any on my multi-stream, or at least everything I see is from the debate, so I'm not going to relitigate all that. I'm going to say then goodbye to the live audience on here.